Good evening, everybody. Please meet Kalinda.
Kalindi.
Kalindi. Oh, sorry. She's someone you can describe as a woman of many parts. She researches at the interdisciplinary sections of law and anthropology. Her research spans the terrain of dispute processing as a site to understand diversity in governance, the meanings of justice, and the notions of the self. Halini took a Bachelor in Laws from ILS Law College, University of Pune in 2007, and for the next 2 years worked as a litigation associate at Nengadi, Shah and Himayatullah for Bombay High Court. Still in the quest for more knowledge, Kalindi went back to school and took a master's in laws from Queen Mary College, University of London. From there, she worked as a research associate at the National Center for Advocacy Studies, UNIU, and as a doctoral fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology at Halle. She obtained a PhD from Martin Luther University, Halle in 2017, and in 2019, she served as a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Policy Studies, IIT Bombay, for several years. He has worked as a visiting faculty at Symbiosis School of Liberal Arts, Pune, ILS Law College, Pune, Maharashtra National Law University in Mumbai. Today, at this very moment, she is a Case E Fellow. Her monograph titled State Law, Dispute Processing and Legal Pluralism, Unspoken Dialogues from Rural India was published in 2020. She is actively associated with Women's Livelihood Program at Avani, a not-for-profit organization in India, and she teaches courses on personal law, social justice, and law society at the Symbiosis School of Liberal Arts and the Maharashtra National Law School. Please join me in welcoming Kalindi Kokal. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for all those very hard pronunciations that were put in there. So thank you first to Casey for this very generous opportunity to let me explore a part of my work that has remained sort of sidelined for a while, but has been ongoing empirical research all along. I have been associated with a not-for-profit organization in the state of Uttarakhand since 2007, right after I graduated from law school. And this research really springs out of that and has continued to be an engagement also with the community. Before I begin, I'd like to say that what I'm developing here, the target audience in mind, is really legislators, jurists, policymakers, and human rights activists. And what I want to do is to sort of think about this whole rational idea of justice that legal discourse works with and see what meaning rituals of justice or rituals for justice, I'm still struggling with what's the better conjunction, lend to this sense of justice or this idea of justice, which is very South Asian, but I think I don't want to categorize it as South Asian only because I learn here that there are many overlapping mechanisms and methods and rituals across the globe. So what I will do is I will start with a film. I will only show a part of it that sort of can help you imagine where I'm located, and then go into a little bit of the theoretical background and then the actual empirical work with rituals that I've been doing. Okay, before that, I need to show you where I'm located. So that's the map of India, not it's cut out because this PowerPoint. I'm located, if you can see Dehradun, that's the state of Uttarakhand. It's in the north. It borders to one end with Nepal, the other end with Tibet. It's a Himalayan state, and the research is located in what is popularly called as the Central Himalayas, the Lower Himalayas. Within that region, if you zoom in, this is the state of Uttarakhand, and I am located somewhere here between two districts, the Pithoragarh district and the Bageshwar district. And if I zoom in even more, I'm here. So it's really, I mean, just to give you a sense, I'm in within India, I'm still this research is very remotely located. Most of the places that I've studied are still only accessible by foot, but that does not mean that it is very far away from the Indian state. The state is very much present in all these regions. And I will explain why I mentioned that. So this is a film that was made by Discovery for the Tourism Board of Uttarakhand. So you can see how the state wants to present itself. And it's also very relevant to why the study is located there. There are some quotes in the film that are in Hindi. I can translate them after we see the 10 minutes.
This is a land of pilgrimages. It is home to 142 shrines and temples, with hundreds of smaller temples, numerous ashrams, and countless holy sites, each dating back to centuries and millennia. For thousands of years, millions of seekers have walked these paths that wind and bend and curve, leading up to the foothills of the mighty Himalayas. Welcome to Divine Trails, spiritual treasures of Uttarakhand, the abode of the gods. The power-packed, blood-riddled saga of Shiva and Sati is a legend known to all. When Sati immolated herself, Shiva was driven into a violent, furious rage. Picking up her mortal remains, he began to perform the celestial dance of destruction, the Mahatandav. To stop the wreckage of the universe, Vishnu sent his Sudarshan Chakra to cut the body of Sati, pieces of which fell across the Indian subcontinent. And in each place, there is a dedicated shrine to the goddess, collectively known as the Shakti Peeths. At the Kunjapuri Mata temple resides the heart of the goddess. This shrine is a serene meditation spot for devotees and travelers alike.
For me, it was really beautiful because in the West, we lost so much of our religion. So in the yoga also, we worship Shiva to destroy the body, to renew again.
तीर्थ का मतलब है कि जितने हमारे देवस्थल हैं, उनका दर्शन करना, उनकी पूजा करना, वहाँ से आध्यात्मिक शक्ति प्राप्त करना। पहले ही देवताओं का वास यहाँ था। मनुष्य तो बहुत बाद में आए।
Who bask in the radiance of the morning sun and at the sight of Mother Sati's heart, reconnect in silent communion with their own hearts. As breath flows from the heart to the belly, we follow the divine trail of the wind, the central chakra. The navel is symbolized at the shrine of Purnagiri. Devotees trek this route up the mountain, tracing a long and winding pathway, resembling a metaphorical umbilical cord, reconnecting with the Divine Mother who sits atop the peak, offering her blessings to all those who reach her. Now from the shrines of Sati that sit high among the clouds, we traverse with the wind in a different direction. In the sacred traditions of India, the bell is a sonic tool, one that dispels fears and ignorance and signals the heavenly vision that is about to be seen. In the Heart Kalika temple, the loud gongs of hundreds of bells ring through the air, established by the Adi Shankaracharya.
6ठी शताब्दी में जब शंकराचार्य जी यहाँ पर आए थे कुमाऊं भ्रमण में, यहाँ पर काफ़ी घना जंगल था और हुंकार निकलती थी यहाँ से, तो जो सुनेगा उस हुंकार को वो मर जाता था। उसमें शंकराचार्य जी ने जब सुना कि यहाँ पर ऐसे है, उन्होंने कहा देवी शक्ति नहीं हो सकती, राक्षसी शक्ति है। तो माता ने आवाज दिया उनको कि मैं देवी शक्ति हूँ, तुम में शक्ति है तो आ जाओ। यहाँ पर उन्होंने माता से एक प्रार्थना की और कहा कि आप मनुष्य के कल्याण के लिए भी यहाँ पर अपने दर्शन दीजिए।
The Heart Kalika temple is also home to an ever-burning light, believed to be a perpetual fire, Akhand Jyoti, maintained for centuries. The temple and its ferocious deity are revered, not just by the common folk, but also by the protectors of the nation, the soldiers of the legendary Kumaon regiment.
जो प्रथम विश्व युद्ध हुआ था 1918 में, तो उस समय हमारी जो कुमाऊं रेजिमेंट थी उसमें अंग्रेजों का शासन था, तो हमारी कुमाऊं रेजिमेंट वाले इधर के भी कुछ लोग थे उसमें, वो भी गए थे लड़ने के लिए। तो वहाँ पर उनका जहाज डूब रहा था, तो उनके द्वारा ये मनौती मांगी गई वहाँ पर कि अगर हे माता अगर हम बच गए तो रावलपिंडी में हम घंटी बना के अष्टधातु की आपके मंदिर में कंधे में ले जाएंगे यहाँ से पैदल। तो जहाज आधा डूबा हुआ ही ऐसे तैरते हुए किनारे जा लगा, तो किनारे में जाके जब वो उतरे सारे लोग तो जहाज वहाँ पर डूब गए। तो उन लोगों ने फिर रावलपिंडी में अष्टधातु की एक घंटी बनाई, उसको लेके यहाँ पर 2.5 महीने में इधर पहुँचे महाकाली मंदिर में।
The temple, famous for the chants Kalika Mata Ki Jai, is one of the several Shakti temples spread across the length and breadth of the state. Pilgrims flocking from around the globe to pay obeisance to the divine feminine. In Uttarakhand, gods reside not just on land, but also deep below, under the earth. We proceed to a secret, meditative world where it is believed Lord Shiva immersed himself in deep thought. Patal Bhuvaneshwar is said to be millions of years old. It dates back to the Treta Yuga, the time of the Ramayana. It has been shaped not by human hands, but by the flowing force of nature itself.
स्कंद पुराण में जिक्र है सर, ये भगवान का गोपनीय स्थान था कि ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश में से शंकर ही एक ऐसे देवता थे, आदमी जो उनसे मांगता था वो उनको तुरंत दे देते। तो उनको विष्णु जी ने ये कहा कि आप सारी चीजें आदमी को दे देते हैं, जब वो उसको संभाल नहीं पाते तो फिर हमें बीच में आना पड़ता है। तो तब ये स्थान उन्होंने बनाया पाताल लोक, और ऋषियों का सबसे सिद्ध स्थान है पाताल भुवनेश्वर, और ध्यान मार्ग का भी बहुत ऊंचा स्थान बताया गया है। अगर हम ध्यान मार्ग की ओर जाते हैं तो उसका रहस्य भी है। गुफा का जो मुंह है आदमी का मुंह है पूरा, और जब सीढ़ियों में आदमी उतरता है वो आदमी का पेट है पूरा, यानी पूरी शरीर की संरचना अंदर एक इस ढंग से है जिसमें आध्यात्म का सारा रहस्य छिपा हुआ है। पाताल का मतलब है गहराई, और गहराई का मतलब है ध्यान से। तभी भगवान ने ऐसा स्थान नियुक्त किया जहां पर जो है सभी चीजें एक साथ देखने को मिलती हैं।
Across the body of the cave complex, crisscrossing like nerves and veins, streams of icy cold water. A continuous network of water currents has carved this complex into a series of connected caves. The symbols here are many. Swayambhu Lingas, the self-forming symbols of Lord Shiva in the form of icicles. There are many other shapes and structures that have naturally formed on the cave walls. Lord Ganesha's head, Lord Shiva's dreadlocks, the four trunk-like legs of Lord Indra's elephant, Iravat, and many more.
सबसे पहले पाताल में शेषनाग जी का फन है। ये जो भी आप देख रहे हैं सब प्राकृतिक है, इसको किसी ने बनाया नहीं है, अपने आप ये सब बना। और जिनके ऊपर हम चल रहे हैं ये जो है शेषनाग की रीढ़ की हड्डियां हैं। ये पाताल भुवनेश्वर महादेव की शक्तिपीठ है, ये शिवलिंग है भुवनेश्वर महाराज का, और यहीं पर जो है पूजा अर्चना होती है।
Today, owing to the efforts of the Uttarakhand government, the entire cave complex is illuminated, and the powerful sights and subtle sounds of this divine underground trail are accessible for all those spiritual voyagers who seek to bow down to the Lord of the Earth, Patal Bhuvaneshwar. From the tranquil silences of the cave temple, we now travel to the heady din of the people in the towns above. Welcome to the Darbar of the Nyaya Devta, Golu Devta, believed to be an earthly form of Shiva, who is feared by those who do wrong as much as he is loved by those who do right.
इनको पहले से ही कुमाऊं के इष्ट देवता के रूप में माना गया है। यहाँ पर कोई भी कार्य किया जाता है, जैसे शादी होती है तो सबसे पहले इनको कार्ड चढ़ाया जाता है।
ये हमारे इष्ट देवता हैं और ये न्याय के देवता माने जाते हैं। यहाँ अपनी आदमी अपनी समस्या को लिखित रूप में मन में करके यहाँ लगाता है और लिख के भी रखता है। उसके बाद जब पूरा हो जाता है तो उसके लिए यहाँ घंटी चढ़ाने का रिवाज है।
Golu Devta is not just an idol in a temple. He is believed to be a spirit present all over Uttarakhand. And so he is invited to events, functions, and ceremonies in homes and villages. The temple is covered layer upon layer with papers. Lakhs of letters, petitions, and invitations spread all over the temple and appear like the walls of the structure. The Golu Devta Darbar, a microcosm of our wishes, a living structure full of the collective desires of humanity itself.
Okay, I will stop this here because this is a 24-minute film and it's available on YouTube. I'll translate a few of the quotes that I think will be relevant to also to give you a context of how I got into all of this. So in the first, he explains what is Tirth. And Tirth, he says, it means visiting all the temples of this region, worshipping the deities to gain spiritual power and knowledge from these spaces. This was the first home of the gods. Humans came much later. Then you saw the temple of Atkalika, which is this feminine, force. And the priest tells a story. He tells two stories. One is before, in the 6th century, there was a dense forest there, and you could hear somebody like piercing screams from the forest. And anybody who heard those screams would die. So Shankaracharya, one of the sort of enlightened men, I would say, was there in this region at the time while he was traveling the Kumaon. And when he heard this story, he said, if people are dying hearing this scream, that means it is the spirit or it's an evil spirit. So that's when Kalika, the goddess, calls out to him and says, I am not an evil spirit, I am a goddess. And so if you want to confront me, come up ahead. So then he sat in meditation and he said to her that can you also manifest yourself and for the well-being of the people of this region? And that is how then somebody had a dream and the temple got established. Eventually, the second story, she's also the goddess of the Kumaon regiment, which is it's a very strong military section of the Indian Army. And during the World War I, there were members of this regiment who were also fighting on behalf of the British. And seems that their ship was sinking. And so these members of the regiment called out to this goddess and said, please save us. And if you save us, we will make a bell with eight metals and carry it on our shoulders from Rawalpindi, which was close to Pakistan, to your abode in the mountains. And it seems that the ship did not sink. It went near the coast. The soldiers all got saved, and then the ship apparently sank. And then they did create this bell and carry it to Hatkalika temple, which took them 1.5 months of walking. So this is the second story. And then the third one that I think the quote I'll translate is this from this temple from Golu Devta. So Golu Devta is a very popular deity of justice. He's not the only one. So there is another goddess who's also known as the goddess of justice. And the story goes that people will come there when they have a grievance or they have a problem. You will basically write a petition or orally ask the support of this deity to do justice in this issue. And usually once your wish is fulfilled, you will come and perform a ritual, and you could also offer bells, and there are red pieces of cloth that are tied. They show that a wish has been fulfilled. So if you visit these temples, they're full of these petitions, written petitions, and bells and red cloth across. The deities of justice, interestingly, both Golu Devta and Bhagwati Mata, which is the female deity, you see their presence in different villages. So there are the main temples. This is the focus in Almora on the main temple, but you will see smaller temples built for them in the house, in the village, on the farm. So they're everywhere because they should be easily accessible. So this is generally the imagination. So this is not very far from the reality, this depiction by the Department of Tourism. So when I was there in 2007, I was volunteering with the NGO, and every 2 days, somebody would say, I'm on leave because I'm going for a puja. Puja is a form of worship. And I'd be like, why are you all praying so much? Like, why are you always taking holidays for these rituals? It is work. You have to, we have things to do. And so they said, no, everything comes later. First is the ritual. And as I spent time over there and I started getting invited, I realized that rituals were not just about praying. They were about actual conversations with forces of the nature. So you could have a conversation with the wind, with rivers, with streams, and with spirits of ancestors, and these deities like Golu Devta and other family deities. There are many. And this really got me thinking, because I realized that it's not just in a very traditional urban setting, you will pray as a ritual, as a discipline. You will probably have a little shrine at home. But this was more community oriented. This had very specific purposes. And if you didn't do this, it was believed that it could cause problems that had very large implications. And so when I went there for my PhD, I did my doctoral fieldwork also in this region, and I was told that deities and spirits are one layer of legality. They are one space in which people, or one mechanism by way of which people process their conflicts, everyday conflicts. And I found it very interesting because, and this is probably the political context a little bit about why this research becomes interesting in the Indian legal context. So this is a quote, a very recent quote from a very senior advocate in the Supreme Court of India. And she basically, if you look at the quote, it says, why don't we go back to the days of divine justice? So you see that in the legal discourse, or state law is pitted almost against divine justice. It is seen as two things that somehow are very different. One has to choose between them, and in some sense, there is some difficulty in trying to reconcile them. So this is the education I have had for 5 years of my bachelor's, as well as to some extent in my master's. And when I saw something like this deity of justice, it immediately perked my attention, because I was like, okay, what is happening here? Do they not go to court because they're going to this deity? What happens? And during my field work, which was specifically at the time looking at conflict resolution in the state, in this region, I was explained that there are different mechanisms of dispute processing. This is a diagrammatic representation of how this was explained to me. While this is a 2D representation, I would want you to imagine it as concentric circles that are flat and not in hierarchy. The imagination is that the larger concentric circle tends to encapsulate the smaller ones. So dispute processing would really start with in one's own mind, and then actors from these different layers would move back and forth, helping a person settle or resolve or process disputes. The outermost layer, which belongs to the spiritual sort of layer, engages the support of deities who are many, ancestors, actors who are called pucharis. They are basically shamans or oracles who will help people with understanding what is the exact cause of their grievance. If I go directly to that last layer and ask, how does it work? I was given experiences, narrative experiences of how spirits and deities help a person process a conflict. So for example, we had an individual called, he told me that, and this is very recently actually, he told me that after 45 years, somebody came to return 120 rupees to his father. 120 rupees is less than 2 euros. And I said, what happened? He said, well, this is obviously occurred before I was born, that before he was born. And KU's father and another member of the village, another man, they hired a woodcutter to cut a log of wood in the forest. Because that other man did not have cash on him, he asked KU's father to pay the whole amount, which must have been 240 rupees. He paid the woodcutter in the hope that this other man would pay him the other half, but that money never came. So KU's father called out to goddess Bhagwati, who is like Golu Devta, who is another deity of justice, saying that if I have earned this money rightfully, it will be returned to me. So this is a narrative coming from KU, who I know, and he said, we don't know what occurred in that other family's house. Other family's house. But something has happened, and they must have made an inquiry with this actor called the Puchari. And therefore, she must have told them, and they must have realized this conflict where the goddess was invoked, her support was invoked. He has come to return the money. After this, a certain ritual is conducted to thank the goddess, and they will ordinarily eat a meal together, which will involve sacrificing a goat. So this is one example. I mean, I heard several such stories. Another example is DM she was very young when this occurred. Her mother had a physical fight with her sister-in-law, so her husband's brother's wife. And this must have been easily 30 or 40 years ago again. They had a physical brawl in which the sister-in-law got very injured, her husband got injured, and this was all unfair. And so they called out to the goddess. They called out to their family deity, seeking his support, and said, we've been injured unfairly. This was a land dispute. And if you think that we were treated unjustly, you will help us. Now, this was an emotional call made from home. There were no petitions written of any sort. 30 years down the line, DM's brother he's enrolled in the police, and he had an allegation of corruption or something against him, which is a big thing, because then you can be removed out of your job. So it's literally like you can lose your job. So when they tried to figure out why this problem was occurring, it was traced back to this dispute. So I saw the negotiations for this dispute, and it was interesting because now all the main actors, except for the sister-in-law, everybody's dead. The sister-in-law is about 80 years old, and she is telling her niece, who is DM, that at that time it cost me 4,000 rupees, which must be like maybe 400 euros odd. But now, in today's day and age, I need 1 lakh rupees, which is 1,000 euros. So she was negotiating, saying the value has increased because that time it was 4,000. Now the value of 4,000 is equivalent to 1 lakh rupees. And then they actually had this negotiation saying, no, we can only afford to pay so much, and da-da-da-da-da. The real reached a compensatory amount, which she accepted. A ritual was conducted, and she forgave them formally in front of the family deity. And, after that, it is believed that things will fall into place. So you hear several such stories of deity intervention. When I asked, who are these deities? This is where I was sent. Now, the reason why conflict was where my starting point is because that is what everybody thought I was interested in. I am a lawyer, they all know that, and lawyers are supposed to be interested in disputes. So the way this whole story started was of talking about conflicts, interpersonal conflicts, and the intervention of deities in such conflicts. This is the temple of Golu Devta in another region, and this is a shrine for goddess Bhagwati near where I was living. If you go to these shrines, you will see these petitions hanging there. Some people will withdraw their case from court. If it's pending in court, sorry, not withdraw, but if it's pending in court, they'll just bring all the paperwork and hang it there and say, you do something about this. I have stories where judges have backed off from cases saying, the goddess is involved, we are not getting involved any further, because nobody wants to be within the network of this spiritual. Once the dispute or issue is in the realm of the goddess, nobody else wants to be part of this. So judges will find ways of getting out of it. The village chiefs will find ways of getting out of it. Like I said, there are different actors in dispute processing, but the moment it goes to that outermost layer, if that becomes public, other actors will try and find ways of getting out of it. Because her forces or his forces are not tangible, they cannot be controlled. And if you seem to be somebody who's intervening in the way of their way, then you will also be impacted. So I was sent here to see these petitions. And there is research on these petitions in these different temples. The most recent is by Aditya Malik on the go. So he analyzes the petitions, sees how they look and things like that. But this is what I found. So if you see, that is the temple of goddess Bhagwati, and on top it says, whoever comes here with a true wish and wants justice, she will give you her support. She is known as the god. Her temple is not known as a temple, but it's known as a court. So it's the court of goddess Bhagwati or the court of Golu Devta. And there are these petitions where you see they're on a state stamp paper. So people will even get it notarized, written by lawyers in very legal language, and make petitions to the goddess. They will be hung there, and there is a belief that she will do something about them. When I think about justice in this context, I realized more and more. I read many of these petitions, I spoke to people, and I realized that justice had much more to do, was not just about conflict. It had to do with issues that concerned everyday life: birth, death, health, family life, loss of employment, finances, illness, sudden illnesses, ill health of animals. So when I started asking about how people come here or how do they get to these temples, how did they know that this deity is involved? I was told because we experienced Ashanti. So Shanti is peace, and disturbance of peace in one's life is Ashanti. But then what is Shanti? Because peace is a very broad concept. And rituals were conducted to first, when you experience Ashanti, you conduct rituals, you consult with a shaman, a puchari, to find out the cause of this Ashanti, the cause of this disturbance in your life. And she will read rice from your family farm to tell you what is the cause of your grievance, she or he, either. They will read the rice to decide to direct you towards what are the possible causes, whether it has to do with a conflict, whether it has to do with remembrance of an ancestor, whether it has to do with curses, whether it has to do with some sort of disputes that you yourself are engaged in, or if it has to do with none of these and that this is a hospital issue or a court issue. So it could be any of this. So you will consult and you will know that whether a deity is involved or not involved. Then there is the actual ritual, and I'll take you through this. There is the actual ritual of calling this deity. There is spirit embodiment and you converse with the deity. And then there is the concluding phase of thanking the deity. So there are these different stages in these rituals. And this is what my friends were going for all the time. When they said we are going for puja, they were going for these specific different stages of the rituals. And once you kick off the process, you have to go through it till it ends. In the broader cosmology of the belief system, and I think this is important to set the context, is that Ashanti in one's own life, disturbance in one's own life, is connected to a disturbance in the macrocosmic order. And this disturbance in the macrocosmic order is usually due to the actions of oneself or one's ancestors. And the making of justice was essentially the restoring of peace, and thus a process of conversing with the macrocosmic force that materialized in the form of deities, spirits of ancestors, and all natural beings, including winds, streams, trees, shrubs, and the forest. During my doctoral work, when I was trying to understand what principles people were using to tackle disputes, even like humans, like the actors, I sort of contextualize it in the socio-religious conditioning of these communities. These communities that I've been working with are predominantly Hindu. And within the Hindu philosophy, there is a concept of Rita, which basically translates or is described as the natural order. So there is a natural order of the universe, which is why things run the way they do. There is no definition of what is this order, but it is imagined that when this order is undisturbed, there will be peace, there will be abundance, there will be success, there will be prosperity, and most important, there will be balance. So everything can be explained in this, so to speak. So disturbance is when these elements are missing. So when there is a sudden death, when somebody is unable to conceive a child, when there is a sudden loss of crops, frequent visits of a leopard in the village, drying up of a natural spring. So when things cannot be explained to fit within this idea of peace, abundance, prosperity, and balance, then you start inquiring further. The idea is that within this larger macrocosmic order, everybody has a role to play to ensure that this order is not disturbed, which means that humans have a role or individuals have a role to play to ensure that this order is in its place. And therefore, how you act really is dependent on whether you're disturbing this order. And this is defined, or this was described as my dharma. So the idea of dharma is that I need to act not just for the present moment and for myself, but to make sure that I'm acting in an order, in a way such that the macrocosmic order is not disturbed. Disputes are a sign of disturbance or disorder. So when you're processing a dispute as a mediator, you are responsible to ensure that not just do those parties remain happy, but you are doing things in a way that is going to keep this macrocosmic order in place. And it is described as I'm doing my dharma. I am working in the right way, as is expected of me in this universe. Disturbances were caused as a result of inadequate, inappropriate, or the failure of communication with non-humans. And here communication must be interpreted broadly to include remembrance, appeasement, negotiation, and so forth. So in the specific area of interpersonal conflict, the person, the non-human being that you had not communicated with was the deity of justice or the family deity. But disturbances could very well be caused by failure to appropriately remember an ancestor. So if you forget about somebody who's passed away, this ancestor could get upset and cause disturbances in your life. Spirits of persons who had died unnaturally or suddenly, and thus leaving them as unfulfilled souls. Mischievous spirits who were hungry. A displeased deity or a deity's displeased foot soldier. An unresolved dispute which often led to a displeased deity. So there were a whole bunch of duties or actions that one had to do in order to make sure that this order was in place. And if this order was disturbed, it would automatically impact you. And rituals were a way of conversing with this, with the way in which this macrocosmic force manifested itself. So you have to have a conversation with the deity or the ancestor or the spirit of a stranger who's probably moving around. And only this conversation can tell you how this problem will go away. So this is what rituals facilitated. Justice in this big frame is basically when this peace is restored, when this natural order is restored. It really had nothing to do with, it had to do with a grievance in one's life, but on a big level, it had to do with restoration of this natural order. So this is a quote from a judge on his retirement. Did my duty in fear of God and as per the oath. So you saw the first quote from that lady advocate who said either divine justice or the constitution. And you have a sitting, well, now he's retired, judge of the Delhi High Court who are saying, I will do my job in the fear of God and as per the oath. If I am to ask this judge, and I have done this exercise with judges in India as to how do you act, they will say it's easier to do justice and harder to act according to your dharma. Fear of God can be placed as an element of that. So in acting in order to ensure that this idea of Rita is in place. So it's not as opposed as it is imagined to be. And you see these quotes coming up all the time. Coming straight to now the crux of this project, the rituals. So rituals facilitated this conversation with these macrocosmic forces. And there were different types of rituals. There were rituals of inquiry to consult what is the cause of the grievance. Then there were rituals for maintenance of order. So that is also part of the job, to make sure that if there is an undisturbed order, it should remain undisturbed. So you do rituals, you communicate with your ancestors and your deities, family deities, and your natural spring to make sure that this state remains smooth. These are usually rituals of gratefulness, rituals of appeasement. They're called as rituals made with happiness, so khushi ke liye. And they will usually coincide with auspicious occasions. So during marriages, during birth of a child, naming ceremony, all happy occasions. So for example, when a child is born, he or she is first taken to the natural spring. The water from the natural spring, the village spring, is sprinkled on his head. In that, the spring is informed that a child has been born. Similarly, when there is a newly married couple, the daughter-in-law will first go to the natural spring. She will bathe, even before she comes home, and she will bring water from the spring to her home. So that means that the force of the spring, which is of the village, is given her respect in that sense, that we have a new member in the village and you should protect us, or you should make sure you're with us. And then there were rituals for restoration of order. Now, these were usually evoked when there is a disturbance of the order, when there is a grievance, and then the process has to be that the order is disturbed. You have to inquire why it is disturbed, and you have to restore it. These usually concerned conflicts. And so my attention somehow always remained on these rituals of restoration of order, because rituals for maintenance of order are also often, they are not very elaborate. There could be one or two that are elaborate, but not necessarily. And they also happen with a celebration. So during a marriage, you will see these rituals happening either before or after. But rituals or restoration of order are very, very long. They are very, very elaborate. They take place over several weeks and months. And so there is a lot to say about how people imagine justice when you look at just how these rituals work. Also, interestingly, because I was a lawyer and I was interested in conflict studies, I was constantly directed and invited to these rituals of restoration of order. So there is that overlap methodologically. Within the rituals of restoration of order, there are usually 4 steps. One is a consultation with a puchari. The other is the performance of rituals in spaces that are either in the forest, it will happen late at night, it will happen, so these ideas of hidden spaces. Also, nighttime is the time when everything is sort of more quiet and people are away from their busy schedules. They also have a quiet mind, which is very necessary for these rituals. Then there is animal sacrifice and spirit embodiment. All of these elements are common to almost all rituals of restoration rituals for restoration of order. And I will take us through them one by one. So again, one of the spaces I spent a lot of time was is this space, this specific puchari. These are individuals who are going about their everyday life. They are farmers, shepherds. So she's a shepherd. They could be cobblers. They would be doing their jobs, but they have received special powers. They have been chosen, quote unquote, usually through a form of a dream or some sort of realization that they are being called for a special purpose by their family deity. So usually it will be the family deity. In her case, it was her Ishta Devta. So Ishta Devta is your family deity, who came to her in a dream when she had run away from a very, very abusive marriage. So there was a lot of domestic violence in her house. She had run away. She went back to her maternal family. And after living there for 6 months, where also she was quite unhappy, she had a dream, and the deity appeared in her dream and said, the right thing for you to do right now is to go back to your matrimonial family where she had 2 kids, and I will protect you. And the story is that she came back. She said, I was very scared, but I came back. And the next morning, I had somebody at my door who said, I have heard that you can read rice, and she said, no, I can't read rice. He said, no, I've heard you, big stories, you can read. And he had got rice from his family's farm. And she said, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't send this person away. So I read his rice, and I could read his rice. I knew I could tell him automatically what the issue, because when people come to a puchari, they will not say anything. They will only bring the rice, and they will lay it out in a plate in front of her or him, and they will read through the rice and tell you why you've come, where you've come from, who in your family has a problem, what is the problem. So if it also is a matter of accuracy, people will go to many pucharis. So if there is a problem, they'll not just go to one, they'll go to a couple of them. And then the decision on how to process the dispute is basically, it's logic or mathematics or some sort that, okay, 4 out of 6 say that this deity is involved, that means that deity is involved. Because the rituals involve a lot of expenditure. So you don't want to go about doing many times. I have seen rituals where the deity has arrived in the spirit and said, I am not the cause of your problem. You need to inquire more. So you want to avoid that situation, because once the deities arrive, you have to thank him or her and sacrifice the goat. And so you will have to do that many times if you don't have it accurate. So you go to many pucharis. You go to pucharis who are very far away from your village, because you want to maintain objectivity or ensure objectivity. You also don't tell people you're going to puchari. So when I was doing this field work, became really hard for me to ask people, oh, are you going for a consult? Can I come with you? They will never admit it. So I basically was sitting in these chambers of different pujaris and just watching the processes there. I had to turn the method of doing it because people don't speak about this openly. I leave that as a question, who is a pujari? Because this is something I've been struggling with from the beginning. Essentially, a pujari is somebody who can read rice. They can also be a spirit medium, and they do not need a ritual practitioner to invoke the spirit. So they can do it themselves. So in some places I've read this is a shaman, in some places I have read this is an oracle. I am unsure where this fits, if there is really a term that I should stick with. In my doctoral work, I call her a priest magician because she also conducts rituals. She also carries out the next rituals. So she can invoke without the intervention of a ritual specialist. She can read rice. She can tell you the cause of her. She can communicate with spirits. And she can also conduct rituals. So she's also in some sense a priest or a ritual specialist herself. So in this picture, yeah, you can see there's a full room, men, women, everybody will come. Sometimes somebody who is, has been captured by an evil spirit, when they enter this room, they will behave very hysterically because they cannot be in the presence of such a strong force. And her house was full from 5 in the morning to 12 in the afternoon, very busy. She has to follow a lot of lifestyle rules. She can't eat in anybody's house. She can't be touched by somebody who's in menstruation. She must meditate several hours a day. So there is a behavioral protocol that needs to be followed, which she needs to follow in order to ensure that this conversation or her capacity to communicate with the spirits is continuous. And in this case, this photograph is basically the rice is laid before her, and what she will do is she will move her fingers through the rice and then she will read on her nails. But that is her way of communicating with the spirit or the deity. Now, I was invited to a lot of rituals. I continue to attend them also because I have friends in the community. And I just want to give you a sense of what I was just looking at these rituals, and there is really, people have a very hard time describing what these rituals are. You just have to see them. So I was invited and I attended several rituals, celebrations. And if I said, oh, this looks like, what is this called? So in one village, they would say, oh, this is this. And in the next village, they would say, no, but this is this. And so there is really no uniformity in terms of how they're called, but there is some sort of similarity in their performance. But most importantly, there is a uniformity in the intention with which they are performed. So why are they, if I tell them why it's been performed, they'll say, oh, this is this in our language or in our community. So documenting or trying to get responses where I could put this in a coherent way was becoming very hard. But then I realized that is also what to some extent explained again how people understand this idea of justice, which in the legal discourse is very uniform, rational, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to play parts of these videos. Okay, it doesn't want to play ahead. Yeah, so we are not allowed to do recordings in these sessions. Most of my videos got corrupted and I was told, what did you expect? And now it refuses to play here, so I don't know. Yeah. Okay, sorry, not meant to be. But basically, if you can see, they involve a lot of music and a lot of people who are in trance, who are convulsing because they have essentially been embodied. If this occurs, so this is a, for example, this is an appeasement ritual, the central one. And if, let's say, you start convulsing in the middle of it, when in that period when the spirit is being, for this was for a DT. So when the DT is being called, if you suddenly start convulsing and shaking and shivering and you are drawn to the fire, either it's publicly known that you have the capacity to be a medium, but you've not gotten there yet, or there is a possibility that you are possessed, you're captured by an evil spirit. And so if this happens, then it's, I attended several of these. They were always in the middle of forests or late at night, in temple courtyards, very biodiversity rich spaces, essentially. Okay, I really hope this plays because this is very recent. It is a conversation with the deity. So this is Golu Devta. He has embodied an individual and he is having, so just a moment, I'll give you the context, Ilham. There is a family dispute. The dispute is between three brothers and it has affected the health of one of the brothers' wives. And she is very sick. They've already gone to the Pichari. She has said that Golu Devta is upset with you because he is your family deity and you have not been grateful to him and you have not remembered. That's why you are having these disputes in the family and your wife is very sick. He's doing this to draw your attention. And he is here in, he's embodied this, the medium, and you can see it's literally an argument, a fight. This deity is getting angry. There is, there's a conversation which I'll try and translate later.
बताओ ना, अब वो खाली इधर उधर से कभी कोई बोलेगा, कभी कोई बोलेगा, मैटर खत्म हो जाएगा।
So this spirit medium is the person walking around.
जानकारी नहीं थी ना
So he's saying, I'm really sorry, I didn't know, I live in the city, I didn't know we had to remember you.
भगवान जगह हटते रहो हमारे हमारे बाप बोझो यार मोय यहाँ बोझो लगा बोझो अगर भाई मुझे मजाए मुझे
अब कोई है ना कुछ करने का तब लाया
इसलिए मैंने कहा ये करूँगा दो जगह आप ये करो
ये बहुत गलती है कि आप दिले बेगल
He's saying, I'm really sorry. I want to reach a moment. He gets really upset and starts screaming at this individual. The deity is screaming at this man. You can hear the screaming and the shouting.
भूमि 52 गांव पूरा पूर्व पश्चिम 12 उत्तर 12 दक्षिण तक यह धरती धात मांगवा गुरु भाई साक्षी मन में कोई या धाम कोई भूत प्रेत कोई मठान छल डंगरी जब्त जय हिम्मत यो बड़ी आगे ठाड़ो निकले अरे मैं समझ में लगा दो क्या.
So basically, you can communicate with this deity, and in this case, this man is asking for forgiveness, and deity is saying, how can you forget me? Who has been looking after your family? Where have I been? And he's like, no, but I live in the city and we didn't know, we have not learned of these ways. And he says, that's no excuse. So they're actually having this tussle of a conversation with the deity. And this is really a very crucial part of this justice making, to have a conversation with either, so if somebody is possessed or captured, even the spirit will come and they will have a conversation. And then they will basically, at the end of this session, Golu Devta tells him that, okay, I'm going to cure your wife, I'm going to settle your problems, but you must sacrifice so many goats for my soldiers. So usually the deity will be vegetarian and the foot soldiers will be the meat-eating army. Some need blood, some need hens, some need pigs, some need goats. And the deity may also say that I want Godan, which is donate cows for me. And so this is the next day. So this is usually day 1, and then day 2 will be the gratefulness showing rituals. What happens usually is these rituals are very, very different depending on who asks for what. So I have seen, for example, in one case, the deity did not appear in an annual festival sort of celebration, and the village was very concerned with why the deity has not embodied the spirit medium, and they thought something is wrong. And then somebody in the village joked about the deity, and he appeared. And then he got very upset, and this person was apparently, the deity challenged this person and said, you've joked about me, now you look what I'm going to do. And so when this man went home, he apparently got semi-paralyzed and could not get out of the bed the next day. So they had to do a whole ritual to call the deity back and say, we are sorry. And then he said, okay, as punishment, you will donate 8 cows. Now, donating 8 cows is a big thing because this is an expensive animal. What is interesting is now these rituals take a very different form with state law intervention. Cows are no longer wanted because we have a legislation that bans the slaughtering of cows in India. So nobody wants to have a cow because what do you do with it when it's old? So now what happens is there is a marble statue of a cow, and that replaces the real cow. You do the ritual around the marble statue and you pay a considerable amount to the temple or to the specialist. So law intersects with these things. There was a practice that some deities needed a male buffalo to be slaughtered. Now this is not allowed because nobody eats male buffaloes, because there is a high court order in Uttarakhand that says that you will only sacrifice animals that you're going to eat. And so rituals start getting modified because very often there are state actors involved in these ritual performances themselves. Yeah, and the sacrifice of goats obviously remains very common. Here is a case where somebody promised the goddess 8 goats. Yes. Okay. I will not show it. Last slide. All of this together, I'm trying to put it together to try and think about what does it tell us about people's idea of justice and making justice. Is it even a political subject is what I'm left with. Is it really something that the state can do, has to do, should do? It is very emotional. It is actually quite a quest. People have to struggle for it, negotiate for it, and it has to do with a process that is much larger than the rights discourse, which currently the Indian state sets the justice discourse within. It is a performance, it is a conversation, it is continuous. So these are some of the ideas that I'm working with that I still need to put together. But this is one part of it, and I'm happy to have inputs specifically on what else can be done with this data for an audience that is not legal, for example. There are thoughts about it, but I'm happy to have advice on that as well. I'll leave you with this, and we can address the rest through conversation. Thank you.